Blog Talk Radio.
Hey sports fans, time to take your seat in the stands. For the next hour, it's A Kind Voice on Sports with your host, Demetrius Means. He'll have insights, interviews, and more. And now, your half-court, 50-yard line seat for sports, Demetrius Means.
And thank you very much, and welcome to A Kind Voice on Sports, folks. I have another special guest joining me here tonight on A Kind Voice on Sports, folks. This young man, in 2003, he took a risk by walking away from his law career, making six figures, left his law career to become a broadcaster. His wife thought he was crazy. His father thought he was crazy. Everybody thought he was crazy. But he has turned out to be one of the finest radio announcers in sports today. His name is John Michael, the voice of the play-by-play voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers, John Michael. Hey, John, I appreciate you joining me here on the Kind Voice on Sports.
No problem, Dimitri. It's great to be with you. And by the way, they all still think I'm crazy, just for the record.
I tell you what, if there is a story, John, that is a very inspirational and a story that talks about for people to continue to keep on dreaming, this is it. Here you are, a trial lawyer in 2003. First of all, you graduated from Notre Dame with your degrees in mechanical engineering and business and administration after earning your law degree, and you worked as a trial lawyer for 5 years in construction law at K&L Gates. And then in 2003, you make the decision to leave that profession after making six figures to become a broadcaster. Your family and your wife must have said, what in the world is going on? Tell me about it.
Yeah, they said a little more than that as well, Demetrius. But I tell you what, I appreciate the kind words and everything. That said, all I really am is a guy who likes sports. And you know, I'm a guy who doesn't have a lot of, ton of other hobbies. I like to play sports. I like to watch sports, and I like to talk about sports. And as things started to progress in my career as a trial attorney, I realized more and more that while I like the law, that sports is something that I really, really enjoyed. And I decided to, just on the side, start calling some high school and small college games. I sent out a tape. I got a break. They brought me in, and football turned into basketball, and hockey which turned into baseball. And so all of a sudden, while I was practicing law during the day, I was moonlighting, calling these games on the side. And I loved it. I fell in love with it. And after a couple of years, I got an offer from a small minor league baseball team in Hagerstown, Maryland, which was then the single-A affiliate of the San Francisco Giants. And, I had that decision to make, continue to be a lawyer and think about what could have been or roll the dice and step away from the full-time practice of law and give this thing a whirl. And fortunately, I decided to go to that small minor league baseball team, and it all started from there.
John, becoming a lawyer is almost like becoming a doctor. I mean, you go to school forever. Did you always have in the back of your mind that you knew you wanted to go to school for law, but did you always have in the back of your mind about broadcasting sports at some point in time in your life?
Not really. It's a good question because my family said, you know what, if you knew this before, you think you maybe could have saved us the time and trouble of going through this whole law school thing and dealing with all of this. But no, I mean, I was just a guy who liked sports, and it was something that I decided to do almost on a whim, and it just happened. I mean, I fell in love with it while I was practicing law. And again, it's nothing against the law. I really did. I enjoyed what I did, but the question was, do you want to wake up every day and go to the office 12 or 14 hours a day, or do you want to go to an arena? Do you want to go to a stadium and instead of reading, cases and law materials, do you want to read about sports? And that was a pretty easy decision for me, regardless of the money involved. So that's what made me decide to take the chance.
How were you able to reason with your wife going from making six figures as a lawyer to $5,000 a year broadcasting radio, minor league?
Yeah, there wasn't much reasoning. I didn't have reason or logic on my side at the time. But fortunately, she actually was my fiancée at the time. So she still decided to go ahead and marry me, even with this crazy decision. And fortunately, it worked out. I mean, it is funny though how your stresses when you're an attorney and you make that kind of money, your stresses aren't really money stresses. Your stresses are different stresses. They're work stresses and things like that. And when you you make the move, all of a sudden you're living paycheck to paycheck, and you blow through your savings in a hurry, and suddenly your stresses are different stresses. And while you're loving every minute of going to work and talking about baseball and calling games, all of a sudden you're looking at your bank account, you're looking at your wallet, and it's not a pretty picture. So, and because of the fact that I didn't do it coming right out of college, it was a situation for me where I had to move. I mean, I had to get going quickly. I had to be good quickly, and I had to challenge myself to move up the ranks in the minor leagues as quickly as possible and not waste any time in doing so. And you know, fortunately, the right people heard me at the right time, and I caught a couple of breaks, and that's how I made my way up from baseball, eventually through hockey, and up through the minors, I should say, to the National Hockey League.
Well, you talked about you had to move quickly. Obviously, you did, but you did it really in a fast-paced way because your first broadcasting was you were doing hockey. You were announcing hockey play-by-play for the Hagerstown Suns and the Lake Erie Monsters. Hockey has to be difficult, especially going right into it. How did you get right into doing hockey and be prepared for it?
You know, it's interesting for me, just being a guy from Western Pennsylvania. I grew up watching basically all four major sports, so to me, making the switch from baseball to hockey wasn't all that difficult. I mean, there's differences in terms of how the broadcast obviously has to go in terms of pacing and things like that. But for me, baseball's almost, and people find this strange to hear, but when you compare baseball and hockey, baseball's almost more difficult to call because if you put a stopwatch to the action, it's only about 8 minutes of action that takes place in the 2.5-hour game. So the rest is filled with stories and stats and, you know, things that you learn about the players. And then when the first game's done, you still have 2 or 3 more games against the same team. So if you use all your material in the first game, you have to really figure out what you're doing the rest of the series. But hockey, to me, hockey and basketball are pretty similar in that when the puck's in play or when the ball's in play, the game calls itself. And because radio needs to be so descriptive, you spend so much time telling the listener who has the ball, where the puck is, what kind of a shot it is, you know, what kind of a save or a rebound it is, that takes up a big chunk of the broadcast, and that description is what makes the broadcast come alive. So, again, to me, baseball, in a way, is more difficult than going to hockey. I found that transition to be a lot easier than one might think when you compare the two sports.
How was it difficult at all making the transition from being a lawyer into sports broadcasting?
Not really. I mean, law prepares you in a lot of ways for broadcasting, and that, first of all, I was comfortable standing up in front of juries and telling stories and things like that. And also it teaches you to be careful about what you say. I mean, when you're a lawyer and you're in a deposition or in a trial, you get a transcript of everything that you say, and you learn very quickly that when you say things that you don't mean, they can come back to bite you pretty fast. So you learn to choose your words more carefully, I think. So I thought it prepared me well to move right into baseball, which then like I said, it transitioned into hockey and from hockey into basketball. So for the most part, the transitions have been pretty smooth, and I feel pretty fortunate about that.
You listen to A Kind Voice on Sports with your host, Demetrius Means. I am talking with John Michael, the play-by-play radio voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers. He went from the courthouse to the broadcasting field. John, in 2009, you were hired by Fox, Ohio, as the pregame host for the Columbus Jackets telecast. What was it like going right from hockey now as being a host?
Well, the difference for me is, when I was in the minors, it's interesting because it was mostly radio, but my final 2 seasons with the Lake Erie Monsters, I did both radio and TV, and now suddenly I was coming and doing all TV. So, of course, you know, the look on TV is a lot different, especially for Fox, than at the major league level, at the NHL, than it is at the minor league level. So the biggest adjustment for me is talking to the Fox people and having them tell me what color suits I should wear, what color, you know, what works well with other colors and things like that. Whereas in the minors, you know, they could care less what I wore. But I'm a redhead, by the way, which, you know, limits, according to them, what I can wear in terms of suits and things that look well in high def on the air. So that was an eye-opener to me in that, you know, they said, you're going to want to stay away from the reds and the pinks. And why? Because it clashes with your hair and it doesn't make it look particularly good on Fox. So it was funny to hear those kind of things. I needed them, and it was good to hear. But that, to me, was the biggest difference moving from the minors straight to TV in the NHL, is that the look was so important and that was such a big deal heading into the season.
Well, you talked about the look. Now, being a lawyer, and you mentioned about the look, because the look was all about preparing you for TV, looking good on TV, but being a lawyer, you have a distinct voice, a voice that is a catchy voice. How much your position as an attorney help you out as a broadcaster?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I never, I'm comfortable with my voice, but I never thought it was one of those classic voices that, like the Vin Scully type voice, or even a Kevin Harlan who has the booming pipes. And frankly, I never thought about it too much as an attorney, although it is kind of part of the deal when you're talking to a jury and trying to convince a jury one way or another. But I've been fortunate in that I am pretty comfortable with my voice and the way it is, and I worked on it as well. When I went into broadcasting, I read all the books. Again, as a self-taught guy, you buy as many books as you can get your hands on and read about all aspects of broadcasting and controlling one's voice and being able to breathe the right way to be able to optimize your voice is something that I read about and something I try to put into practice. And fortunately, I had a number of years in the minors before you really get a huge following, so you can kind of perfect that or at least get as close to where you want to be as you can. So it is something I've worked on, but again, I've never thought that I have one of those booming or classic voices like you hear out of some of the greats in our sports.
I would have to think also, from being an attorney, that also help you to better prepare yourself for research, going over and studying notes, to be the best play-by-play announcer that you could be.
No question, and I think research is huge. It's such a big part of what we do as play-by-play broadcasters, and to me, you owe it to your listeners. I mean, my goal, I always think, is to enhance my listeners' enjoyment of the game. I mean, the guy who worked hard in the factory all day long and wants to flip on the game on his drive home and enjoy it, that's my responsibility to make that as enjoyable as possible. So along with making it enjoyable, making it fun, I think a big part of that is making it informative and making the listener learn something or something interesting to the listener, and you're not able to do that unless you kill yourself with research, and that's always been a big thing for me, and that's always been an easy thing for me because, again, it's not like I'm reading law cases that I'm not particularly interested in. I'm reading about sports. So, while I'm saying that, yes, it's research, and, yes, I spend a lot of time doing so, I'd be lying if I didn't tell you I enjoy it because it's, when I was taking breaks during law, I'd be looking on the internet and reading about sports. So for the most part, again, it was a big part of why I made the decision because it's something I love to do, and I was fortunate to be able to put myself in a position where I can every day wake up and can't wait to go to work, and I love what I do. So is research a big part of it? Yes, but is it something that I enjoy? No question about it.
We're going to talk about when you started your position with the Cleveland Cavaliers, but what was the most challenging thing for you going into broadcasting?
Into basketball or into broadcasting in general?
Into broadcasting, period.
That's an interesting question. To me, the most challenging part, I think, is just knowing the sheer numbers that are against you. I mean, how many good people are in the broadcasting field that are in the minor leagues and for one reason or another never get a shot, never get a chance to make it to the major leagues. And again, there are a slew of talented play-by-play guys out there, and to go into it knowing that you're fighting against pretty major odds is something that's daunting. I mean, there's no question about it, and it's challenging to be able to get over that in terms of knowing that everything that you do, every single game that you do, let's say in a baseball season, you're grinding out 140 games in the minors, and to know that every single game and every single inning you're working towards something and to continue to work as hard as you can and prepare as hard as you can so that maybe there's a small percentage that someday you might get called up to the next level or someday eventually you might get called up to the majors. I think to me that challenge of knowing what's out there and knowing that your chances aren't great in this field is something that is difficult to overcome and something that is difficult to mentally prepare yourself for on a day-to-day basis when you're preparing and trying to call games one by one and make it through a season.
And you're listening to A Kind Voice on Sports with your host, Demetrius Means. I am talking with John Michael, the radio play-by-play voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers of the NBA. He went from the courthouse to the radio booth. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I am going to ask John about when he first got his position with the Cleveland Cavaliers. He had to wait to get the call. Is it like waiting for the jury to come back? We'll find out about that and more. You listen to A Kind Voice on Sports. We'll be right back after we pause for the cause.
Hi. We're not sorry we missed you. Your call really isn't that important to us. But if you leave your name, number, and a brief message, a computer will record your voice. And a tiny red light on our phone will flash until we cover it with a piece of tape. Bye now.
What are you really saying to the customer who can't reach a real person? Help your business rediscover the lost art of human interaction with Ruby Receptionists, the virtual receptionist that does what no voice machine or ordinary answering service could ever do. From our offices in Portland, Oregon, Ruby handles all your calls with a perfect mix of friendliness and professionalism, making your customers feel special while making you look good. Just like a full-time receptionist at a fraction of the cost. Try Ruby free for 14 days. Visit callruby.com, or better yet, call us. 866-611-RUBY.
He went without food, not to lose weight, but to help people lose generations of hate. While many around him rose up with violence, he sat down for peace. When others used religion as an excuse for war, he used it to remind them of love. Mahatma Gandhi made the world a far better place by reaching out with the strength he cultivated within his soul. So, pass it on from the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
And now back to A Kind Voice on Sports with Demetrius Means.
And thank you very much, and welcome back to A Kind Voice on Sports. This is your host, Demetrius Means. I am talking with John Michael. He is the radio play-by-play voice for the Cleveland Cavaliers of the National Basketball Association. He went from the courthouse as a lawyer into sports broadcasting. And, John, in October of 2011, you were hired by the Cleveland Cavaliers. What was the call, waiting for that call, especially knowing the fact that you were in a pool of 200 applicants, and you got the call, waiting for that call? Was it like waiting for the jury to come back?
It's an interesting question. To me, it wasn't as much like that because I was fortunate that I was at the time working for the Columbus Blue Jackets. And, let me back up a little bit and explain to you how it went down. I was working for the Lake Erie Monsters, which is the American Hockey League affiliate of the Avalanche, and they're located in Cleveland. And they're owned by Dan Gilbert, who also owns the Cleveland Gladiators and, of course, the Cleveland Cavaliers. And as I was calling hockey games there and got the call to come up to Columbus in the NHL, before I left, Dave Dombrowski, who's our executive producer of both the Monsters and the Cavaliers, said, you know what, just in case we have an opening over the next year or so, why don't we get a tape of you calling basketball? And I said, well, that sounds fine. So when the series, the Cavaliers were taking on the Magic, I forget exactly what year it was. I think it was 2008. Dave said, why don't you sit up there we're going to set you up with the radio equipment and whatnot, and why don't you call the game? And I did, and he taped it, and he said, we'll keep this. And then a couple of years later, Joe Tate, Hall of Famer that really was the voice of the Cavaliers since the inception of the franchise, he decided to retire after 39 years with the team, and Dave gave me a call, and he said, hey, I still have your tape, and if you want to be in this group, if you want to throw your hat in the ring, you can do so. So I said, of course, that sounds fine. And we went from there. So basically it wasn't as if I was sitting around waiting and hoping for this to happen. It was more of a situation where I was already with the Blue Jackets, and I said to myself, if I get this terrific opportunity with the Cavaliers, fantastic, and if not, I remain with the Blue Jackets, and I'll be fine doing that as well. So it wasn't as, I guess it wasn't as a situation where I would be waiting for the jury. It's not like I was biting my nails or things like that, but I was fortunate to be able to get the job, and that actually was a lockout season, so I stayed a couple more months on with the Blue Jackets before eventually joining the Cavaliers, and went from there in season number 1.
Well, it may not have been like waiting for the jury, but I know one thing. You had an opportunity to sit by Dan Gilbert, who was the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers, and he also got a chance to hear you. Man, you talk about faith and being in the right place at the right time. When you look back at that, Dan Gilbert, the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers, and now you are the voice. Man, talk about that.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, Dan, of course, is a huge supporter. He owns the Cavaliers. He also owns the Lake Erie Monsters and the arena football team in the same building, the Cleveland Gladiators. And Dan's a hands-on guy. He likes to, he loves his Cavs, but he also is a big supporter of the hockey team there, the Monsters. And when he's at games, he's come on the air a couple of times, so we invited him on the air with us, and we sat there for a period together and talked about hockey and talked about everything else. So it was how I got to know Dan, and I think it was a help. I don't think there's any question about it. Dan was familiar with my work when I was in that final pool of applicants, and Dan, of course, has say-so on calls like that, who's going to be the next broadcaster. So do I believe it helped? Yes, I do. And like I said, I was fortunate to have the right people hear me at the right times along the way, and Dan was certainly one of those people.
Did you get a sense from Dan at the time that he was thinking, this guy is somebody that I'm interested in?
I don't think, only because Joe Tate was such a solid, again, Joe, the Hall of Famer, had been there from day number one. And at the time, he was still going strong. I think it was his 35th year or something like that. And hockey is in certain ways so separate than basketball. I'm not sure Dan even knew I could call basketball at the time. So I think it was more of just Dan being a part of the broadcast. But I certainly don't think it hurt in the long run when he realized I can call basketball as well. So interesting question. I'm not sure, but my guess is I don't think he was thinking that at the time.
Well, you talked about Joe Tate, who was the announcer before you for 39 years as the voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers. This is what he said about you, Joe Tate. He said this guy didn't just be yanked. He wasn't just yanked off the bus. This guy, he's a pro sports broadcaster. What is your thoughts when you hear Joe Tate say something like that?
Oh, it's great. We're talking about a guy whose name hangs in the rafters now at Quicken Loans Arena, and then, as you know, Demetrius, that doesn't happen every day. And this guy is revered around Cleveland, and rightfully so. And it was just such an honor that the organization looked to me to be able to carry on the torch of the excellence of radio calls that he had brought to Cleveland for so many decades and so many years. It was funny. Byron Scott was the coach when I got there, and Byron, after I was introduced to him, he said, "Nice to meet you." He said, "You have some pretty big shoes to fill, about size 17, so you better be ready to go, kid." And he's right. And Joe's a guy who's been revered here in Cleveland, and rightfully so. And I understand Joe's enjoying his retirement now, so nice to hear that he's still doing well. But yeah, to hear kind words from such a legend is something that's really special to me.
You're listening to A Kind Voice on Sports with your host, Demetrius Means. I am talking with John Michael, the play-by-play radio voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Did Joe give you any advice?
No, not really. In fact, Joe's the kind of guy who always said, when I'm done, I'm done. I'm going to walk away, and, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time hanging around the organization or whatnot. So it was more of a good luck, kid, a pat on the back, and do your best, and I know you're going to do great type of thing. And that's just Joe. That's just the way he is. He did come back for Zydrunas Ilgauskas' jersey retirement this year, but other than that, I don't think he's been back to the arena in the last 3 years, just like he said he would, and he walked away from the game gracefully, and just like you figured he should. So Joe's the greatest. No real words of advice, but just go get him, young man. That was about it.
You get hired for this position. You're going in to take over. Well, not to take over, but you're sitting in the seat of a legend, Joe Tate, of 39 years. Going into this thing, John, you know who you are, but now you have to kind of convince the listeners who you are. Did you feel any pressure at all?
It wasn't so much pressure, Demetrius. It was more motivation. And this is a job. If you can't get motivated for this job, you're in the wrong profession anyways. But just as an added layer of motivation, here you are sitting in, and you look up from your seat, and you see his name hanging up in the rafters. And that's a pretty good impetus for you to get going and call some pretty good games and do your work the right way. So was it motivating? I don't think there's any question about it. And I think it's. Was the transition an interesting one for the listener? Of course. When you're accustomed to hearing the same guy for 4 decades calling games, you get used to that voice. So, but fortunately, the transition's been a good one. I've heard kind words from all of our listeners throughout my 3 seasons here. So, I feel fortunate to be in this city and fortunate to be able to hopefully have taken over things smoothly from Big Joe.
I know I read in the Cleveland Chronicle where you had said that it felt like you were Aaron Rodgers stepping in for Brett Favre. How long did it take for you to get comfortable and to find your own groove?
Actually, it was funny. The reporter was asking me the question, saying, what does it feel like to be able to step in when you have a guy like this? And I said, why couldn't it have been Don Majkowski who I was taking over for, not a Brett Favre here? I said, I hope that our listeners are going to look at this like a Aaron Rodgers situation where they say, we love Brett Favre and we'll never forget Brett Favre, but boy, am I happy that Aaron Rodgers is our new quarterback. And I was likening that to Cavalier fans saying, I hope that that's how they treat this situation, that I can step in and be like an Aaron Rodgers to them. So like I said, I think the transition has been a great one. I've had help in the booth. Joe always worked alone, and, that was typical back in Joe's era. And there still are a number of broadcasters in the NBA on the radio side who work alone. But Jim Jones, Cavalier legend, also won a championship with the Lakers. He is my color analyst. He does a fantastic job. So I think there's no question there's a different feel because, again, when you're simply having two guys compared to one guy talking, it's more of a conversational feel. And I think people have adjusted to it well, and I think people have enjoyed the broadcast over the last couple of seasons.
When you look back, John, from when you got the position till now, but going back, your experience in broadcasting basketball was limited because you were just calling high school and small college games. When you look back and you see where you are now, what comes to mind?
It's an interesting question, and that is something that I don't want to say I was nervous about or uncomfortable about, but it was something I was a little hesitant about in terms of learning the NBA. But I tell you what was a help to me was that I mentioned that the year I was hired was the lockout year in the NBA. So what happened was I knew I had the job in October, but I was still working for Fox and doing the NHL for the Columbus Blue Jackets, and the season didn't begin until Christmas. So I had a nice 2.5 months of extra time. Now, I spent that summer previous learning the league in case I would get this opportunity from the Cavs, but I got a nice extra, like I said, 8 or 10 weeks or so while the hockey season was going on to do some basketball and look over basketball and watch more and more tapes as well. So the transition, it worked out for the best for me because of that lockout, because I got those extra weeks. And I would have been ready to go at the beginning of the season, but I felt even more prepared when the season kicked off around Christmas because of that lockout year.
You hear so much about when people try to analyze play-by-play announcers, they talk about their voice, they talk about the way they call the game. I thought it was very interesting when the Cavs president, Len Komorski, pointed to your versatility and your storytelling. And he said you had very strong fundamentals. Your thoughts about that?
Well, I think, it comes from, to me, and as we discussed, Majors, I'm completely self-taught. So basically I listen to every broadcast that I've ever done, and I listen a couple of times, and the way I get better is I make a list of things I like and things I don't like during a broadcast, and it turns out typically things I like maybe 1 or 2 items, and things I don't like, I have about 3 or 4 pages per broadcast of things that I want to improve upon and things that I want to get better on. And I think by doing that and going through that process and trying not to repeat mistakes over and over, and the fact that I've done that since I've been in the minors and you were able to work out the kinks for a couple of seasons, I think that's what enabled me to get to the point where I am now and to be able to more seamlessly tell stories, and it's the preparation too. It's as we discussed. If you work your tail off to be ready for the broadcast, those stories are just going to be there for you, and they were certainly kind words from Len Komorowski, and I hope he continues to feel the same way as we get ready for season number 4 here coming up.
It's obvious that you cannot beat research and being prepared, but you said something that I can really identify with. You said that you were a self-taught broadcaster. I myself became a self-taught broadcaster. And I know one of the things with becoming a self-taught broadcaster is that you kind of get information and you learn from so many other people. As you were able to learn from so many other people and get a broad description of how people did things and how they went about it, how much of that data did you process and put it all in one and say, I like this, I can use this, but I still have to be me?
Yeah, it's a great point because you're right. When I was doing hockey, every night after our games, I'd come home and, you get the NHL package and you'd watch games and you'd listen to things that you like and you listen to things that you didn't like. And once hockey became basketball, I do that thing. I do that to this very day. I watch games not only to be able to scout teams that we're going to play coming up, but also just to listen to the broadcasters and listen to, to me, it's interesting to hear how guys, once they work down a certain path and they don't like the way that they're going, are able to backtrack and get themselves out, and the best ones can do that seamlessly and get right back on track, because throughout the course of a 2.5-hour broadcast, you're going to go down paths that you're not comfortable with. You'll say a word or two that you don't like, and you'll need to recover. So do I glean a lot from watching other people? I do, but I think, your style is your own, and you know how that is as well. You are, to me, I call what I like to hear. So that's how I basically base what I do in terms of how my broadcast sounds upon. In hockey, for example, I like when broadcasters will give you the blow-by-blow description of a fight. Some guys don't on the radio, some guys do. I like to hear the blow-by-blow description of a fight, therefore that's how I call it. So, when you watch all these different people and when you listen to all these different people, to me, the process is pulling in and gleaning the things that you like and making it part of your own in terms of your own style. So that's how I've gone about doing this thing as far as watching other people and watching other broadcasts and making it all one sort of conglomeration into my own call.
You listen to A Kind Voice on Sports with your host, Demetrius Means. I am talking with John Michael. He is the radio play-by-play voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers of the National Basketball Association. We're going to take another break. We'll come back with more with John Michaels, the voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers. We'll take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
Hi, I'm Claire Bloom, and I started End 68 Hours of Hunger to put bags of food in the hands of local children who have little or nothing to eat for the 68 hours between the free lunch they get in school on Friday and the free breakfast they get in school on Monday. Our vision is to end childhood hunger in America one school at a time, and that's how we operate. We start programs wherever we have 2 volunteers in a community who are prepared to step up and take responsibility for running the program, and we grow from there. Today, we're feeding 900 children each weekend in 29 communities, and we're growing. If you're interested in starting a program in your community, please visit our website at www.end68hoursofhunger.org and click on the tab at the top of the page that says FAQ. Everything you need to know about starting a program is there, including videos on how to talk with groups, how to set up your space, and even what kind of food to include in the bags. Feel free to reach out to me at n68hoursofhunger@gmail.com.
College softball players Mallory Holtzman and Liz Wallace know winning isn't everything.
It's how you hold your head at the end of the game and how you walk off the field.
These 2 athletes carried their opponent around the bases after she injured herself hitting the winning home run.
Whether you win or lose on the field, if you did the right thing, then you did win.
And they showed us the right thing is sportsmanship. Pass it on from the Foundation for a Better Life at Values.com.
And now back to A Kind Voice on Sports with Demetrius Means.
And thank you very much, and welcome back to A Kind Voice on Sports. This is your host, Demetrius Means. I am talking with John Michael, the radio play-by-play voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers of the National Basketball Association. And, John, you guys do about, an 85-game schedule, is it?
Yeah, we do all 82 regular season games plus all the preseason games, which are 7 or 8. So it's been about, other than the lockout year, which was a 66-game season, it's been about 90 games a year over the last 2 years.
Well, not only did you talk for a living as a lawyer, now as a sports broadcaster and a play-by-play voice, how do you protect your voice?
That's an interesting question as well. I tell you what, for whatever reason in basketball, I think it's easier than hockey. One part of that is having a color analyst with me that you're only talking half the time. I think also that hockey, because of the goals and whatnot, you're more apt to strain your voice than you would be in basketball. Now, of course, there are big plays in basketball going in either direction, but I think in hockey it's more apt, I think, to strain your voice. So, I mean, for me, it's basically just taking care of yourself. I mean, I've been fortunate through my 3 seasons with the Cavaliers that I haven't run into too much trouble. But you do have to take care of yourself, and you have to make sure you get your rest and you're ready to go come game time. I'm a big napper. That does it for me, Demetrius. I mean, on game days, I nap about 2 hours a day, so that's always served me well in terms of getting rest and being ready to go, and for my voice. So maybe that's the key. Who knows?
So with napping and trying to get rest, how do you balance family lifestyle as well as work?
Well, it's interesting. This season or this year, we just had our first. My wife and I just had our first baby, a 6-month-old little girl. Thank you very much. And it's funny though, road trips, which were no problem at all. I mean, I never had any problems going on the road or worrying about this or that. My wife was the same way. You know, she said, "See you later. We'll have a couple days apart. No big deal." Now all of a sudden with the little one, it is a little bit more of a, oh boy, we're going to miss each other, and I wish I was home to see her. But FaceTime has done the trick with the little one so far. But it is nice to be home and be able to see her and have about 4 or 5 months here to remind her who her dad is and to get ready for next season.
John, I am sure that the state of Cleveland, or the state of Ohio, I should say, would love to see LeBron James come back. What is the talk nowadays? LeBron's coming up possibly on free agent.
Yeah, he does. You're right. He is a free agent coming up this season. Does have a 1-year player option if he wants to hang around with Miami. And it has been interesting to see how there was so much vitriol and anger when he left, and I think that has subsided certainly. And I don't think there's any question that, you know, I don't think there's a lot of people out there that if LeBron said, "I do want to come back to the Cavaliers," they'd have a problem with it. I mean, we're talking about arguably here the best player in the world, and it's going to be interesting. The way I look at it is this: I'm not sure LeBron even knows right now what he wants to do. I mean, so many things can happen between now, the first round, and the end of the season. Does Miami win another championship? If so, does that affect what he wants to do? If not, does that affect what he wants to do? And I think there's so many scenarios that can play out that the Cavaliers as an organization are saying, you know, I think if it happens, it's going to happen, but if you prepare for that to happen, or if you're hoping and wanting and waiting for that to happen, and that, you know, your future moves hinge on that, I think you're kidding yourself. So I think if he comes back, fantastic. It would be terrific for the team. But I think also if he makes another decision, if he decides to stay for another year or go elsewhere, it won't be the end of the world, and the team certainly is going to be able to move forward. And it's a big free agency period this summer, and we'll see how it all plays out.
When LeBron James left, there was a lot of people hurt in Cleveland. A lot of people hurt, including the owner, Dan Gilbert. Do you think LeBron's, if he should return, would heal all those wounds?
Yeah, I think it's possible that he could. I mean, like I said, there's still a percentage of fans that say I'm so hurt that I would never want him back. But I have a feeling, again, if he comes back, that they might change their mind, you know, sooner rather than later. And I think, you know, I don't want to speak for Dan, but I do think that those two have patched things up, and I do think that it could be a marriage that would work if LeBron decides to do that. So, I mean, you know, Dan's a professional, and you know, obviously Dan was hurt as well, and he had strong feelings about it. But like I said, I think they're both professionals, and I think we've gotten over that, and time seems to heal a lot of wounds. And I think if LeBron would want to come back to Cleveland, I don't think anybody would have a problem with that in the organization, specifically Dan Gilbert.
Obviously, you are one of the number one people who have an opportunity to gain relationships with a lot of the players on the team. You get a chance to get some insights. What are some of the things, or what is the thing that people have it all wrong about NBA players? There's been a lot of negative stereotype. What is something that people just have it wrong?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that really struck me, and this is a little bit different than the NHL, is that a lot of times in these media scrums, there are certain members of the press, and trust me when I tell you this, Demetrius, there are so many good members of the press. I don't want to paint this with a brush or anything, but there are a couple folks out there that try to get players unraveled, that ask questions that try to get players to say things that they don't want to say, or anger players, and you wonder why some of these guys are standoffish to the press. Well, it's because of that select few that tries to rattle these guys or try to rile them up, to the point where they're standing there and they're patient and they're trying to answer the question, and I'm standing there listening and thinking, man, I would lose my mind if somebody was asking me this question. So I think there's a perception out there that a lot of NBA players are cold or are standoffish or don't answer, or are not forthcoming when they answer questions. But a lot of that, to me, is learned, and a lot of that is because of what we see in these daily scrums from day to day. Certain people, and again, trust me when I say this, there's so many good people out there in the press that do their job and are a big part of what makes the NBA what it is today. But there are a few people that I think sour it for me and sour it for the players, and I think that's a big reason why there is that misperception out there.
Well, speaking about good people, a lot of people look at the NBA, they look at broadcasters, people in the limelight, as having all the glitz and the glamour, and I know that you, as well as the family players of the Cleveland Cavaliers, you guys do a lot of community service stuff or involved in the community. What are some of the things that you do within the community?
Honest to goodness, to me, that's the best part of what we do. I mean, we get to go into schools, we get to talk to different community groups, and just to be able to talk to the kids and bring smiles to their faces and go into hospitals. I mean, the Cavs every year, the Cavs do a terrific job with community relations and with the charities, but we go into the hospitals once around Christmas, a couple times a year, but the one that stands out to me around Christmas, and the players, we all wear Santa hats, and they go into these children's hospitals and bring gifts to the sick children. And man, that's something that tugs at you, and that's something that's really special. And to me, that's probably the most important part of what we do, to be able to give something back to the community, especially the ones that are sick and the little ones. And the Cavs are a great organization in terms of doing that for the city of Cleveland.
And, John, that goes right along with this program called A Kind Voice on Sports. That's what we're all about, producing positive shows, talking about positive things, giving people a voice. You have that kind voice. As the broadcast and the play-by-play announcer, you get a chance to be known within the community. You talked about, you go into the hospitals. What is it like for a broadcaster like yourself when people say, oh, I know who you are, because they recognize the voice?
Well, I mean, again, I'm just, a regular blue-collar type guy from Western Pennsylvania. That to me is pretty special, and it's not about the recognition. You're the same way, Demetrius. I mean, it's nice when people recognize you, but it's so much more important that you're there and you're able to do something for someone else. And if somebody recognizes you and it puts you in a position where you can do things for others, I think that's what it's all about. So, again, for the people, you're not as recognizable on the radio, of course, as you would be as the players or as the TV broadcasters. So we get away with it. We could say anonymous a little bit, but yeah, when you get recognized and it enables you to be put in a position where you can do something and give back to the community, that's something that's pretty special to me.
And you're listening to A Kind Voice on Sports with your host, Demetrius Means. I am talking with John Michael, the radio voice, the play-by-play voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers of the National Basketball Association. I got a chance to speak to Dave Dombrowski, the director of broadcasters for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I got into a conversation with him about what the Cavs do in the community. The first person he said I needed to talk to was you, John. And I enjoyed that conversation that I had with him. And for him to say that I needed to speak to John Michael, who was very instrumental in the community, it's got to really feel great.
It does. It means a lot to hear it from him. It means a lot to hear it from you as well. And no question, it's a big part of what the Cavs do. It's a big part of what drew me to this organization in the first place. It's a big part of what Dan Gilbert's all about. I mean, he gives millions and millions to charities every year, and he expects it out of his organizations and out of his teams. And I love that he expects it, and I love being a part of it right here in Cleveland.
You listen to A Kind Voice on Sports. We're going to take another break, and when we come back, I will talk to John about his radio partners, how they get along, how they like each other. You listen to A Kind Voice on Sports with your host, Demetrius Means. We'll be back with more right after this timeout.
Your sister has a birthday. She's 39 again. Get her something special. You know she's your best friend. Your father is retiring after all these years. Show him just how proud you are in front of all his peers. Let us write you a song. They'll hear a kind voice and you know they'll want to sing along. Let us write you a song. It's coming from the heart and you know that can never be wrong. Your friend is gonna graduate, she finally made it through. Why don't you give her something special now? It's such a sweet thing to do. If your anniversary's coming up for you and your bride, let her know what it means to you to have her there by your side. Let us write you a song. They'll hear a kind voice and you know they want to sing along. Let us write you a song. It's coming from the heart and you know that can never be wrong.
Be it a birth or birthday, a wedding or wedding anniversary, to celebrate a coworker's years of service or to honor a dear friend, we'll create the perfect song for your special person or occasion. For more information, please visit the Song Request tab at akindvoice.org and we'll get started.
Let us write you a song. They'll hear a kind voice and you know they want to sing along. Let us write you a song. It's coming from the heart and you know that can never be wrong. Let us write you a song.
And now back to A Kind Voice on Sports with Demetrius Means.
And thank you very much, and welcome back to A Kind Voice on Sports. This is your host, Demetrius Means. I am talking with John Michael, the radio play-by-play voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers, the NBA Basketball Association. It was just 11 years ago. He was arguing construction law in front of judges and juries, but he now has taken his voice in the broadcast booth. John, obviously, a broadcast team means a lot, especially when you're doing the broadcast, and alongside of you is Jim Jones, the color commentator, as well as a former player. How is he doing, and what is it like to have a color analyst in Jim Jones?
Well, Jimmy's terrific. I mean, what Jim has going for him is he can talk seamlessly about guys from back in his era in the 70s and the 80s and also about guys of today. So he's been a big asset. And Jim's such a big part of the community. I mean, he was part of the Cavs' 1976 Miracle at Richfield team that many thought was the closest the Cavs would have to winning an NBA championship. And unfortunately, that season, Jimmy broke his foot and was unable to go into the next round, the round in which the Cavs bowed out. And Jim also was a part of the 1980 NBA championship team with the Lakers when they beat the Sixers, and he was an integral part of that as well. I mean, you know that series, Demetrius, the one in which Magic Johnson was a rookie. He played all 5 positions when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was out. He took the tip, but if you ever get to watch that final game, it really was Jim Jones playing most of the center position. I mean, Magic gets a lot of the credit, but right. Jimmy was the man in the middle dealing defensively with a couple of those Sixers inside. So he's a guy who's been there before. He's been great to me since day one, a big part of the organization, and I've loved working with him from the first day we were together in the booth.
Many times people they know that the play-by-play voice is the important voice. But talk about why your color analyst, Jim Jones, is important to you and what he brings to the broadcast.
Well, to me, I mean, I don't feel like I'm the important voice. Sure, the play-by-play guy talks more, particularly on radio, purely because you have to know where the ball is. But Jimmy is as important to me. I think what makes us work is that we complement each other very well. I mean, he's really good at bringing the insights, and like I said, he can compare today's players to yesterday's players, and I think people in Cleveland really love that, and they get a kick out of that at Jim. So that's been a big reason. I think that the complementary factors is a big reason why we worked so well, and I love having him aboard, and I love having him as part of the broadcast. And
as always, when you take your break, especially at halftime, Talk about the host, Mike Snyder. He is back. He does a fantastic job. Mike's job as a host, some would say that he's second to none.
Michael's great. Every time we throw it down the mic, I say, let's go down to the best host in the NBA. Took the words out of my mouth, Demetrius. But, yeah, I mean, he's done it for so long. He also has a morning show right here in Cleveland that he's been terrific on. So he's a trusted voice in the community. He knows and loves his basketball. And I really do think he's second to none, and he's a huge part of our broadcast team as well.
John, you're born 1972. You're out of Pennsylvania. You're 42 years old. You can probably sign another 15-year contract. How does the contract work?
I need to hire you as my agent, Demetrius. We'll talk after the show. we actually here at the Cavs. I'm an employee of the Cavs, is the way it works. So that it's not really a year by year thing. It's more of a salary situation. So it's the way I like it. It's the way the organization likes it. So I plan on being here for quite a while, as long as they want to keep me. So it's been a good marriage, and one that's worked over the last couple of years, and one that hopefully goes well into the future too. Speaking about it being a good marriage, what does your wife say now since you've left becoming a lawyer? Fortunately, we're not making four figures anymore, which is one bonus, or this thing wouldn't have lasted very long. But she's been the rock, Demetrius. I mean, this thing doesn't happen if you don't have a solid partner to be with and somebody who was supportive of. I mean, you think about it, when we bounced around. I mean, we started in Hagerstown, Maryland. From there, went to Johnstown, Pennsylvania. From there, Springfield, Massachusetts, over to Cleveland, down to Columbus, now back to Cleveland, and pretty much each of those stops has been right around 2 years. So, if you don't have somebody to love and support you and to take care of you during those tough times, you're simply not going to make it. And more importantly, to put up with it, as we were scraping and going paycheck to paycheck, making minor league money. So she's been a rock, and she's a big, important part of where I am right now.
John, it's not easy doing 85-plus games a year, playoffs and family and all that traveling. What gives you the drive?
Well, just to try to be the best and try to bring the best broadcast to these great fans as we can. We talked before. I think you owe it to a listener. You owe it to these loyal fans who pay their hard-earned money and who pay attention to this team to give them the best call, the most enjoyable call that you can, and that really motivates me. I mean, that's important to me. I love what I do, and I love it so much that I want others who are listening to the broadcast to love it as much as I do. And to me, it's a huge motivating factor. And to me, frankly, when you lose that motivation, or if you don't have that same motivation, it's time for you to get out of the game. So it's something that pushes me every day, and it'll push us right into next season. So hopefully the Cavs start to climb up the ladder in the standings and head toward the postseason.
Broadcasting's been good to you. Have you ever said to yourself, I should have gotten to this earlier?
That's a really good question. And you talked about yourself being self-taught. I mean, you see a lot of these younger guys coming up that went to broadcasting schools, went to Syracuse, for example, and by the time, Demetrius, they're hitting 22 years of age, they had more broadcasting experience and learning and know-how than I really have ever had, or that I had by the age of 35 or whatnot. So, yeah, is there a part of me that says, boy, would it have been nice to get that experience when I was in college so that I knew what I was doing and knew what I wanted to do when I was 22 years old? Sure, but at the same time, I'm not sure I'd trade what I've done, because we talked about it. I've had a lot of different experiences, and I enjoyed going to Notre Dame and going to law school and practicing law and going over to the minors from that. So I don't think I'd trade it for anything, but that said, with a couple extra years of know-how and experience have been nice, I don't think there's any question that it would be.
John, you may have a doctor listening tonight. You may have a police officer listening tonight who've always wanted to be a broadcaster. Would you advise them to take the same road that you did?
If you're prepared to go through the hardships, I mean, if it's worth it to you, if you love it that much, and I talk to a lot of younger groups, and my message is simply this, is do something where you wake up and you love what you're going to do every day. I mean, it's a simple message, and it doesn't mean you have to be a broadcaster. If you like being a doctor, you like being a lawyer, and you wake up every day and you can't wait to go to work and do that, then go do it. But, if you don't, to me, I think it's important in life to do something that you love to do every day, going to work, obviously you're going to be happy, and you're going to make a lot of other people happy if that's the way you can situate yourself. So, look in the mirror and figure it out. That's what I did, and I've been very fortunate, as I said, very blessed, very fortunate that things have broken the right way and been able to work out. But that's kind of the mantra that I've lived by and that I talk to youngsters about when we're able to go into the classroom.
If you were to stop today, would you go back into arguing construction law?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. Hopefully that won't happen in the near future. It's always been there. It's in terms of having a fallback, I guess it's a nice thing to do, but I don't know if, going from arenas and stadiums back into the courtroom it's something that I desire to do right this second, Demetrius, but so we'll see how it plays out over the next couple of years.
Is there anything, John, in broadcasting that you do that you don't like at all?
Not really.
Is there a routine or?
Not really. I mean, again, I enjoy sports so much that I like going to practices. And sometimes we're fortunate that our coaching staff allows our play-by-play guys to go to practices, and we're able to see what they do there, and without question that enhances what we do, and that helps us in our broadcast. And while that can be tedious, it's something that I enjoy. Like I said, the travel has never really bothered me. Now, again, we're having a little one in the house, a little bit. It tugs at you a little bit now when you have to leave the little one and the wife and go off. But for the most part, it's been a profession that I've loved and a profession that I continue to enjoy.
Are you superstitious?
Not really. Why do you ask?
Do you have a routine that you do all the time?
Well, I do have a routine, and it's not because I'm superstitious. It's because through trial and error, it's something that I found that works. And like I said, I told you, I'm a big napper. If I do a game on a day where I'm unable to get a nap, I can hear that game if I have it on tape 7 or 8 years later and can tell you instantly there was a game where I didn't get a very good nap. So do I have a routine? Yes, but only because I've tried a number of different things, found what works best, and because I feel that works best and gives me my best chance to have a good call, that's what I do every day on game day.
Are you a hard judge on yourself?
Yes, I think and again, my guess would be you're the same way. When you hear about guys who have made it to a certain level and are self-taught, I think that's the only way you can get better. A lot of listening to yourself, a lot of criticism, hearing from a lot of different people, and being open to criticism, particularly, mostly constructive criticism, I think is a huge way to improve yourself. And I think if you're not critical on yourself or you don't care enough to listen to your own broadcast and get better, it's a quick way to exit the business. So, I think I'm very hard on myself, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Okay. John, this is the part of the show I call rapid fire. I'll give you a word, and you give me the first thing that comes to your head. You ready?
Ready.
Notre Dame.
Pride.
Trial lawyer.
Difficult.
Fox Sports.
Can I say 2 words?
Sure.
Great organization.
Dan Gilbert.
Great owner.
Dreaming.
Broadcasting.
Favorite book.
Boy, is that a hard one. I tell you what, this is actually, I know this isn't one word, but I joke with my friends that I read so much in law school and as a lawyer that I said, I will never read another book. I will never read another book if it's not a sports book the rest of my life. So I have no good answer for you, Demetrius.
Okay, favorite sport.
On that one. Favorite sport? I apologize. I guess I'm a little long-winded here. That always depends upon what time of the year you ask me. If we're coming to the end of the basketball season, summer's about to start, I'll tell you baseball. If we're getting into the dog days of baseball and football preseason's rolling around, I'll tell you football. And then when October and November start to come around, it's basketball and hockey. So I know it sounds like a wishy-washy answer, but it depends what time of the year that question gets asked to me, what my favorite sport is.
And the Cleveland Cavaliers organization.
Class.
And finally, the NBA.
NBA. I know this is supposed to be rapid fire, and I'm not doing very well at this, Demetrius. The NBA, it also is. It's an organization. I know there's more than one word. An organization that I'm proud to be a part of. I really am. I think they've taken terrific strides under David Stern. I know he's about to turn things over to Adam Silver, but boy, the game has progressed in so many ways over the last couple of decades, and it is a league that I certainly, without question, am proud to be a part of.
John, you may have, for those who are listening to this show and they like what they're hearing, some may want to see your website or get in touch with you. Is there any email address or website where someone can contact you?
I am on Twitter at CavsJMike. That's CavsJMike, CavsJMike. And you can always contact the Cavaliers organization at Cavs.com. We'll be happy to talk to anybody that would like to have a word or any questions about broadcasting or things like that.
John, I really believe this is such an inspirational interview for me, because for someone to go from being an attorney to sports broadcasting, taking a chance in 2003, I think you've inspired a lot of people who are listening here today, here on the Kind Voice on Sports. I really appreciate you taking your generous time out to share with us here on the Kind Voice on Sports.
Well, Demetrius, I'll tell you what, anytime, and it's been a pleasure being on the show. Obviously, you do a terrific job every week. You do your homework, and it's been really nice to be able to talk to you as well.
Thanks a lot, John. We wish you the best in the coming days, the months, and also the coming years with the Cavaliers as their play-by-play announcer. Take care.
All right. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
All right. You just heard it, folks. John Michaels, the radio play-by-play voice of the Cleveland Cavaliers. He went from the courthouse to the broadcasting booth. Wow. What a story. You've been listening to a Kind Voice on Sports. For John Michaels from the Cleveland Cavaliers, this is Demetrius Means saying, until next time, take care of yourself, because I'd rather be talking to you than about you. You have been listening to a Kind Voice on Sports.
Kind voice.
have.